The people of the internet are with us. I love that story, Too Much Noise, in part because it's funny and in part because it speaks to a shifting perspective about what to praise and about how to understand our conditions in life. I love the poem, You Must Praise the Mutilated World, because it does, from the different direction, the very same thing, disrupts our notions of what and how and when to praise, even in situations of loss and exile. That we call forth that praise. And so I come here a little bit as a Grinch this morning, seeking to problematize the topic of praise. And I hope you'll come with me. Now, it may seem common sense that it's good to praise. What's not to like? After all, the person who is praised is rewarded for some good character or good deed. The person who's doing the praising is practicing the mindful habit of noticing the good and further reinscribing its presence in their mind by naming it aloud. Because too many people, and probably some in this room, grew up in households with too much criticism. To practice the habit of praise might seem an ongoing effort to right those wrongs, to correct the distortions in a person's mind or outlook created by overcriticism. Widening out to the spiritual realm, when we're moved by some aspect of creation, by the frost on the grass or the stars in the sky, isn't the appropriate response to give words of praise? Or if we are blessed by life or the holy as we understand it, wouldn't it be stingy not to answer with an open-hearted expression of praise? There are congregations for whom the words worship and praise mean just about the same thing. So why on earth would whether or not to praise even be a question? Why would a sensible and good-hearted person, anyone other than a Grinch, ask the question, why praise? So I'd like to start to explore that question by telling a story. In my 20s, as I moved from place to place, I worked at a number of group homes, residences for people who had profound developmental or emotional challenges for whom the structure and the programs of institutional living were seen to be more supportive than living at home with their families. One of these group homes in Iowa was for teenagers with various diagnoses whose behavior could become violent pretty quickly. It was one of the most intense working experiences I have ever had. You had to be relaxed and supportive, helping people through their daily activities, while also being at the same time vigilant in order to protect one of the other residents or even yourself or the teenager from the outbursts which could be sudden. It was on a Sunday afternoon monthly staff meeting at this home where we were discussing some of the recent dynamics among the residents when I raised my hand and started to ask a question, and all at once, before I could get a word out, the room broke out in laughter. Now, I had intended to ask whether the manager had written up the next month's work schedule, because I was worried about one of the residents and was interested in spending a little extra time with her, even though working on her coping skills. But instead, there was laughter through the room. As it died down, the manager noticed that she had misread the situation and said, "Oh, I thought you were going to say something funny." I went on with my question about the upcoming schedule and working with this resident, but the manager seemed distracted and said she'd talk to me later. That moment has stuck with me over the years because the group of people, including my boss, were certainly offering a kind of praise. They were telling me that they thought I was funny, and certainly that can be a nice thing for a person to hear. But if we drain their response of its particular content, if we observe this moment as research psychologists and that staff meeting as a kind of a laboratory, you'd see that the 25-year-old Jake was getting rewarded for one kind of behavior, the funny kind, and not getting much response for another kind of behavior, the kind where you express some compassion for one of the residents. As I made sense of that Sunday afternoon staff meeting at that Iowa group home, I realized what the group wanted from me and was rewarding me for. It was not my efforts at compassion, it was my sense of humor. And it served a purpose, I guess, in that intense work setting to have somebody on staff who could break the tension with a joke or offer a sideways angle with a wink probably helped with everybody's burnout. But if that feedback from the staff team got them more of what they wanted from me in the way of humor, it also had an impact on the kinds of behavior that I performed while at work. More and more, I realized, I just became the funny guy on staff. 100 years ago or so, a psychologist named B.F. Skinner popularized an approach called behaviorism. He said that people's behavior is most strongly shaped by variables in the environment. Over time, he suggested, people and other animals are conditioned by the responses they receive for their behavior. If you took psychology classes at some point in your life, you'll remember this kind of conditioning through punishment and reward as classical conditioning or operant conditioning. If you have trained a dog, this is most likely the way that you've done it. If the dog does what you want, if it sits or lies down or comes when you call it, you'll give it a treat. If it doesn't do what you want, it doesn't get the treat. A dog quickly learns what kind of behavior will earn what kind of treat. It's a transactional dynamic, tit for tat, quid pro quo, one thing for another, and it might seem a fair trade. But Skinner also said that once a behavior is established, the person handing out the reward can go to the next level. And the next level of this kind of training is to withhold the reward every so often, or even most of the time. Now, you might think that the animal who has learned to perform in a certain way in order to receive the reward would in turn stop performing that behavior. Not getting the cookie, not going to do it. But in fact, the opposite happens. Even when the reward is only given every 5 or 7 times, the animal will persist in regular performance of the behavior. In fact, the behavior will have more urgent and anxious focus and crispness to it as the animal seeks to coax the reward from the trainer's hand. Now, this might seem the simple behavior of a simple creature, but recently, when my family traveled out west, I was walking through the Las Vegas airport, and I saw a number of my fellow humans slumped on stools at the slot machines, dumping their quarters in the requested behavior for what they knew can only ever be an inconsistent reward. And what about you? As you think about your own childhood, what was the behavior that got a response from the people around you in your household and at school? Maybe earning an A got you the praise that you craved. Maybe helping fold the laundry or stacking the wood. Maybe it wasn't positive behavior that caught people's attention. Maybe if you really wanted to get a response, to get a rise out of people, you needed to find a way to make some kind of a mess. Maybe you crumpled into a heap at the slightest challenge, which gave others the chance to come in and save you, poor thing. Or maybe you did that through acting up and acting out in a way that got you yelled at and punished or got somebody to worry about you, which you learned over time was what love could feel like. But it's no more, some people call that attention-seeking behavior, but it's no more attention-seeking than the person who makes an A or helps out with chores for the reward of compliment or somebody's warm regard. So as we think about this dynamic as performing in ways that are going to get a certain response, we know the calculation isn't the same for each and every person. In a world of violence against women and trans people and systematic violence against people of color, the choice to behave in ways that might lower the risk of attack comes with higher stakes than the choices made by somebody not at the same risk. Our church in Oak Ridge runs a transitional housing ministry for people moving from homelessness to permanent housing, and I'm gratified by the relationships I've made with some of the guests of that ministry. I'm inspired by what it takes to make that kind of transition. And at the same time, I can't pretend that their friendliness to me and whatever relationship we might develop has nothing to do with my relative power over whether or not they have shelter that night. Flipping that, there was a year when the church board president was not too happy with me the whole year. My efforts to work on that relationship partly came because I believe in working on relationships, but I can't pretend that this person's power over my continued employment had nothing to do with my efforts. We learn all of this negotiating these relationships for a particular kind of response right out of the gate. We grow up learning what's going to earn us that cracker, what will get us the treat, and what's going to keep us safe. And maybe childhood is a process of listening to what it is that the world wants out of us. Does it want us to achieve and impress? Okay, we'll do that. Does it want us to be unruly and make trouble? Okay, we'll do that. Sometimes in the process of getting older, a person is capable of breaking out of those ingrained habits, of performing in ways that expect a certain response, but sometimes, as we all probably know, it's just not so easy, especially when we continue to get rewarded for behavior that over time we've practiced and gotten pretty good at. From as early as I can remember in school, I was the class clown. It seemed to serve a purpose, and I sure knew my place. So I practiced making faces in the mirror, and I watched Saturday Night Live like a medical student watches a complex surgery. That practice, especially when it was rewarded and praised, meant that the process of growing up and learning to diversify my behavior, even to behave in ways that wouldn't get praised, became a challenge. Why try to do something that I hadn't practiced, that I wasn't good at, that wouldn't get praised? And it could be that in your life, even if what you were praised or punished for was a different behavior, you can relate. Maybe in your family or school you were the achiever or the scapegoat or the poor baby who needed help or the wild one or the expert or the helper or the creative one. And you've practiced whatever it is in your life over the years, and you're good at it now. And you can see its purpose, how it benefits others. And darn it, maybe deep inside a part of you craves that reward, craves that response, craves people noticing you in just that way. And maybe it's more than just a part of you that craves it. Maybe, to be honest, it's a lot of you that craves it. Maybe you've craved it so much that you teach others what they can expect out of you, so that when you behave in certain ways, people will know to respond in the ways to which the reward center in your brain has become deeply addicted. Maybe also way back in psychology class, if you took it, you learned the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is the kind I've been talking about, that external reward, a response from somebody or something else. Intrinsic motivation is what comes from within. And the difference between these two, extrinsic outside and intrinsic inside, shapes not only how we relate to other people in the workplace or the congregation or in our family, the difference between the two shapes how we view ourselves. Amidst all the spiritual diversity in this pluralist community, Unitarian Universalist congregations covenant to affirm and promote 7 principles. The first of these 7 that we say will affirm and promote is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, inherent is a lofty term, rarely used in conversation. It means bone deep, present from the start, built in, not an add-on, straight from the factory, part of the design. To help understand the implications of using the word inherent, we might ponder the meaning of another word, instrumental. When something is of instrumental worth, that means it's good for something. You can put it to use. You can use that good thing to achieve some other end or some noble purpose. And if we think of our own lives and how probably each of us aspires to be of some use to others and for our lives to be put to some purpose, to imagine ourselves to be of instrumental worth, probably doesn't sound all that bad. But the principle that we covenant to affirm and promote says that each of one of us is of inherent, not instrumental, but inherent worth and dignity. And I take that to mean that I don't have to strive and impress and behave certain ways to earn a certain measure of worth in the eyes of others. My worth doesn't come from what I do or even how hard I've tried. My worth isn't measured by what I'm good for. Because I have inherent worth, I'm already a creature of dignity right out of the box. Without lifting a finger, I'm a child of creation, precious in the sight of the holy and beloved. And if that's true of a stinker like me, well, I guess it must be true of a stinker like you. No matter what good you've done, or what bad you've done, or if you've ever managed to do anything much at all, Your worth is inherent, not earned or worked for. It's a gift, it's a blessing, it's a birthright. And this, as you hear it, might sound like a relief, and for some of you maybe it is, but for me it's a challenge to ponder and to try to understand and relate to the enormity of this blessing, which comes from sources far beyond my control to add to or detract from, let alone ever try to control. My behavior in life doesn't affect my inherent worth and dignity. It's already been given. If I am to live as if I believe I've got inherent worth and dignity, my behavior has to be oriented towards something other than what other people might think, something other than praise, something other than criticism, ultimately, something other than safety. Think about the shape of your life as you're living it right now, the relationships, the work, the community, the interactions. Think about where you show up and also how you show up. How much of that behavior of yours emerges out of a desire for praise or approval? How much of that behavior comes from a hunger to be useful, as if you had to earn your own worth every day? And on the other hand, how much of how you show up in this life of yours emerges from the awareness that you are a precious creature of inherent worth and dignity, beautiful in the eyes of the holy, and bearing the story of your ancestors in each moment? Yesterday, I gave a talk at a conference in a room full of people whose research on family therapy I've read, and who, if I'm honest, intimidate the snot out of me. When the talk was over, it was clear that a number of these people didn't think much of it. And I'm still carrying that disappointment and a little bit of shame with me this morning. But I also know that I made a decision. I decided I wasn't going to say the orthodox things. I decided that I was going to try to think for myself. So even in that wintry chill of their professional disapproval, I am content that I thought for myself, and I spoke for myself, and that as long as I'm true to what I believe in and to whom I serve, in the long run, I'll be glad that I acted not to get their praise, but to uphold my integrity. It's not easy to live and to act according to what I truly believe, and I'm going to keep trying to chip away at it month after month, year after year. I know that some of you in this room are on the very same journey, and that some of you are pondering whether and how you might start. And still others of you are struggling to imagine how it even could be possible in the life that you have. I can't say that I know what you're up against this morning. All I know is that there will come a day when each one of us will no longer be here. And when this day comes, I hope that each of us will have lived not as we felt we needed to please others, but in the bold and creative ways our own hearts and minds and the spirit of love called us to.